Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone podcast, episode number 627 for the 18th of October 2020. Richard Saunders coming to you from Sydney, Australia. A little bit overcast, a bit of rain last night, but not a bad sort of a day. Coming up on this week's episode, we have part 3 of Heidi Robinson's interview with Brian Deer. Brian Deer, the man who wrote the book The Doctor Who Fooled the World, about Andrew Wakefield and the MMR vaccine / autism controversy, which really wasn't a controversy in the end. And amongst other things, we find out the link to Elle Macpherson, the Australian model. And following that, it's Logical Fallacies with Michelle Bickersma. And this week, Michelle looks at weasel words. That might be interesting. No, that's not a weasel word. What's a good example of a weasel word? Find out with Michelle's segment later on in the show. Any politicians listening can get some tips. And then we have another installment of the Book of Tim with Tim Mendham. And this week, Tim will be looking at wishful thinking, risky business, gambling, and more. Then to round off the show, we continue in our series looking into the archive of Australian newspapers and reports, so on, magazines. A dive into the trove we go, and look for references over the decades to the term ESP. Yes, it's an old-fashioned term. You really don't hear it anymore. Extrasensory perception. Now, before we really start the show, it's less than a week. And by the time you're hearing this, it might be very much less than a week until the Australian Skeptics National Convention, Skepticon 2020. We've been telling you lots about it in the lead-up, with mentioning some of the fabulous international and local speakers lined up. And no matter where you are around the world, you can join us this year for Skepticon 2020. If you haven't got your tickets yet, now's the time. Go to skepticon.org, skepticon.org.au, or you can Google Australian Skeptics, or you'll find it easily enough on the show notes. For the last several months, in fact, there is a link to skepticon.org.au. I'm very much looking forward to talks by Michael Marshall and Alice Howarth and people like Dr. Carl Kruszelnicki, and the list just goes on. And I'll be playing my part. I'm announcing the Bent Spoon Award this year, and my colleagues Tim Mendham and Jessica Singer here in Sydney will be announcing some of our other awards, like the Media Award or the Skeptic of the Year and things like that. It'll be so nice to take part in a skeptical event again. I've been missing that a lot this year. I think the last event I was at and gave a talk was Skepticamp in Victoria at the beautiful Aireys Inlet. And what a wonderful time I had. What a really nice couple of days that was, folks. I stayed in Anglesey with my friend Michelle Bickersma and our colleague Steve Roberts, the UFO expert, was there too, and some other people. We had Japanese pancakes, we had some nice wine, we looked at the stars. Yeah, I do miss all that lovely social aspect of being a skeptic. Well, I'm sure those days will return, but at least we can enjoy being together online. But now it's time for me to run downstairs, tiptoe over the cats. In fact, I won't do that because I must admit there's one right over there, aren't you? Oh, yes. What do you want? She's had her breakfast. That's Maud. Hello, Maud. Yeah, she's a bit confused because I've done a lot of vacuuming and cleaning lately, and suddenly things are not where they're supposed to be. Well, I'm going to run downstairs anyway, get myself a nice fresh cup of coffee and some Vegemite toast as ever. The old favorite. While I do that, I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone. Raw Skeptic Report with Heidi Robertson.
Hello everyone. Today I present part 3 of my 3-part interview with Brian Deer, the man who wrote the book The Doctor Who Fooled the World, about Mr. Andrew Wakefield and the so-called link between vaccinations and autism. Today, Brian tells us about the impact of Wakefield's work on vaccination rates, the other authors involved in the original paper, and the link to supermodel Elle Macpherson. Mr. Brian Deer, welcome to the Skeptic Zone.
Hello Heidi, good to be here.
What was the impact of the Lancet paper on vaccination rates in England and perhaps even abroad?
Oh, in the UK, the vaccination rates dropped like a stone. Wakefield had an earlier paper, slightly earlier than the one we've been talking about from February 1990. I had one in 1995 where he tried to pin bowel disease on the MMR vaccine. And from that point, and then accelerating with the 1998 paper and then other stuff, vaccine rates dropped like a brick down a well as parents became more and more concerned. And by the time I came to this story, because I didn't begin my investigation until the autumn of 2003, by that time, vaccination rates were down in the 70s in much of the country. We were starting to see the first outbreaks of measles. Parents were agonizing over whether to vaccinate their children. Parents of children with developmental issues were blaming themselves, suffering the agony of guilt of believing it was their own fault for vaccinating their child, that their child had autism. We had all of that. And then that rolled out from the UK to the rest of the world. So with Wakefield's campaigning, and then he moved to the United States, that story that was really paid for by this $100 million lawsuit, all of the work behind that, the parental anxiety, the campaign groups and all that was then exported to the United States and set off the chain of events that leads us to where we are today with the anti-vaccine movement.
Yeah. And what about the other authors on the paper? Because Wakefield wasn't the only author on the paper. There were several others. Tell us about the other authors and the fallout and what happened with them.
Yeah, well, look, we see what Wakefield does, and he's got a pal called Big Tree in the States who set himself up as an autism guru, a former tabloid television field producer, saying, oh, look, there were all these other authors. It wasn't just Wakefield. Wakefield said, me, my colleagues and I. He loves that expression, my colleagues and I. What he'd done was get a whole bunch of people, everybody everybody in the hospital who'd even pretty much seen one of these children, he put on the paper. There were another 12 authors. There were pathologists, there was a neurologist, there was a pediatric psychiatrist, and several gastroenterologists. These other authors actually didn't satisfy the criteria for authorship of that paper, because to be accepted as an author of paper under the standard terms for biomedical publishing, you have to have an involvement in multiple aspects of the trial. These other authors, some of whom were juniors, none of whom were eminent in any way. One was a professor of pediatric gastroenterology, a very small size specialty, not an eminent man, significant within his thing. Even he never knew which child was which in the paper. And he said, well, the data in this paper were presented to me by Wakefield in a sort of master chart. And then when he was questioned about this at the General Medical Council hearing, he said, well, I trusted Dr. Wakefield. And that's true of them all. They were just happy to have their names on a paper in the Lancet. And the juniors were in no position to question it. The other authors were in no position to identify which child was which. That paper was written by Wakefield. And even when other authors made suggestions, when some of them saw the drafts of the paper, it was up to him whether he took any notice of what they said. So the idea that there were all these other authors that were endorsing what Wakefield said is extremely misleading. And then after my first story, the authors came together and retracted the interpretation section. There's a section of the paper called the interpretation, and it was within that they claimed a potential link, a possible link, an association between the MMR vaccine and autism, and they retracted that in a partial retraction of the paper. And then the paper was fully retracted after the General Medical Council hearing, retracted by the journal, who opposed the General Medical Council hearing in the first place.
Now, there's a very important aspect of this story that we have to cover, and that is that Andrew Wakefield is now linked with former supermodel Elle Macpherson. How on earth did that happen, Brian?
Well, they met at an anti-vaccine conference. What she was doing there, I don't know. She's big in the wellness industry, I know that, and they were seated together at a table. And obviously, he would be tremendously interested in her because not only had she been on the front of Sports Illustrated, I think it was 5 times, but she also was the recently divorced wife of a billionaire. So he obviously was happy to see her, and she bought in to all this stuff about how he'd been persecuted and none of it's true. It's all a pack of lies, and he was an innocent man and he'd given his life for the sake of the children and all that stuff. She bought into that. But as I understand it, I spoke to somebody, one of his business associates, just a few months ago, who told me that the relationship with Elle Macpherson was really, in some sense, possibly on the back burner now. She's made an announcement saying she's not engaged to him after there's been speculation in the press that they were engaged. So it doesn't look as though it's quite as solid as people are making out. But I just imagine it would be a wonderful scene to witness of her and him sitting by the swimming pool in Miami, at one of her homes in Miami, and her saying, reading my book, The Doctor Who Fooled the World, which anyone can get from Amazon. The easiest way to get it is from Amazon, or ask at your local bookshop and get it from Amazon would be even better, because then the bookshop might get more in stock. But so she's sitting by the pool reading The Doctor Who Fooled the World, and she says, well, Andy, you said to me, blah, 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 and it says here, blah, 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 and he says, oh, it's all lies, it's all a fabrication. And she says, well, in that case, you're saying it's all this is malicious libel. And he'll say, yes, it's malicious libel. And she'll probably say, well, you need to go and see my lawyer. And indeed, he's already sort of raising the spectre of litigation over my book. But all I can say is I don't want litigation. Nobody in their right mind wants to spend their time in lawsuits. But if he sues, he'll lose.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got everything well documented and backed up and referenced in the book. Now, so you mentioned people can get your book on Amazon, or I guess in every good bookstore.
Yep, Amazon's probably the easiest way in much of Australia, but save you a bit of driving and the lockdown issues. But yes, it's out there and it's in the bookshops, and it's now actually just gone on sale in North America. So it's now getting a bit of publicity. It's had a lot of press in the Australian press, which has been nice.
Oh, it's fantastic. And I tell you what, I got my hands on a copy as soon as I possibly could, and I couldn't put it down. It was absolutely enthralling, disturbing, and it had me on the edge of my seat the whole way through. So thank you so much for both writing the book and for joining us today on the Skeptic Zone. We've really enjoyed having you.
My pleasure, Heidi. Thank you very much.
Thank you to Brian Deer for taking time to appear on the Skeptic Zone over the past 3 weeks. You can find a link to Brian's book in this week's show notes. This has been Heidi Robertson from the Northern Rivers Vaccination Supporters. You can find us at www.nrvs.info, or just look for us on Facebook at the Northern Rivers Vaccination Supporters. Bye for now. Oh, hi, Maynard.
Oh, hi, Heidi. Great day in this park.
Yeah, if you like that sort of thing.
Look over there. A yowie.
There are no such things as yowies, silly.
Might be just a dog. A big dog. I think it's a King Charles Spaniel thing. No. It's a yowie.
Maynard, if it's a choice between it being a dog or a yowie...
No, it's a yowie. Yowie. Argument from authority. It's a yowie.
Hey, you two, what are you arguing about?
Maynard thinks that dog-looking thing over there is a yowie.
A yowie?
Or maybe Chewbacca the Wookiee?
I see. Okay, we better look this up in the Skeptic's Dictionary online.
The what?
The Skeptic's Dictionary online. It features definitions, arguments and essays on hundreds of strange beliefs, amusing descriptions and dangerous delusions. It also features dozens of entries on logical fallacies, cognitive biases, perception, science and philosophy. It's at www.skepdic.com.
Right, Hardy. Prepared to be amazed.
Okay, yowie. Here it is. It's under Bigfoot. It says... Most scientists discount the evidence of Bigfoot because the evidence supporting belief in the survival of a prehistoric biped ape-like creature of such dimensions is scant.
You know, maybe that is just Chewbacca after all.
Here, Chewie, come on. Here, Chewie.
Thank you, Skeptic's Dictionary Online.
Logical fallacies. What are logical fallacies, and why is it important that critical thinkers should know about them? A logical fallacy is an error we can make in reasoning, but it usually crops up when we are discussing or arguing our point of view. Some people might even knowingly use them to try and score cheap points in an argument due to intellectual laziness. They are traps we can fall into, but if we know what to look out for, we can spot them when they occur and stop ourselves from using them. This time, we'll look at weasel words.
These are words or phrases that seem to point in one direction or give a certain impression, but in reality are often meaningless or even misleading.
It can be hard, bordering on impossible, to get some people to use straightforward, no-nonsense language when putting forward their point of view. We see this so many times in the world of politics, for example, when so-called spin doctors advise politicians on how to not answer questions. But weasel words also pop up in many other situations.
This amazing and all-natural supplement has been used traditionally by thousands of people all over the world for years. It may assist in reducing the length and severity of a cold or the flu.
Here the word traditionally and the word may are the weasel words. It doesn't matter if something has a long tradition, it still might not work as claimed. But using the word traditionally does seem to give the claim merit. We've looked at the logical fallacy of the appeal to tradition before. Also, using the word may gives the impression that the claim is true, or at least could be true. But we could also say may not. If the claim is ever proven to be true, then the words will assist could be used.
You think the Earth is really billions of years old and evolution is real? Not so fast. There is a growing body of evidence that creationism is true as more and more scientists accept the account given in the Bible.
In this example, the terms a growing body and more are the weasel words. They sound grand enough, But where is the raw data from? Has there been a proper survey of the relevant scientists? Are these results published? Without providing this extra information, the veracity of the claim is in doubt.
I know I can get passionate from time to time when expressing my point of view. I would like to say I'm sorry if anyone took offence to what I said.
This is known as the non-apology apology. It gives the impression that someone is acknowledging a wrongdoing and trying to make amends, but in reality, it's putting the focus on others and somehow making them at fault. If a real apology was offered, it would sound something like, "I would like to say I'm sorry that I caused offence." From advertising to answers given by politicians to even everyday conversations, weasel words are a way to use language itself as a distraction. If you are unsure about what someone is saying, you have the right to ask them to put it another way, to hopefully get a better answer. Knowing a logical fallacy when you hear one, and even knowing its name, is important when arguing your point of view. However, you may come across as arrogant and not get very far if you call it out by name to your opponent when you hear it being used. If your opponent calls you out for using one, it's time to stop and think about how you are making your case. Use your knowledge of logical fallacies wisely, and remember that even if your point of view is right and you know all the pitfalls in arguing your case, it doesn't always mean you'll win on the day. And as skeptics, we must also remember that we too can be wrong at times. I'm Michelle Bickersma from the Vic Skeptics. Thanks for listening.
Told me that aliens really exist. You met them and swooned with.
Sziasztok!
Hallo!
Hejsan, hejsan!
Did you know the European continent is home to almost 750 million people living in 50 different countries, belonging to an even greater number of ethnicities?
And believe it or not, only a handful of them list English as the first or at least one of the official languages.
And there's an amazing amount of skeptical activism going on out there that you are not aware of because it's not in English.
Yeah, because you know, pseudoscience, quackery and fake news do not stop at borders. They get translated to other languages and transferred across the whole world.
So, if you're interested in weekly updates on what's going on in some of the countries here, providing you with all the interesting facts, news and even some skeptical history,
or if you want to hear interviews in English with brilliant people you sometimes haven't even heard about,
then what you need is to subscribe to the ESP.
Extrasensory perception. You must be really wrong.
No, the ESP as in
the European Skeptics Podcast.
That's right. And if you're wondering how you can find us online, go to theesp.eu.
And you can also find us on Twitter at espodcast_EU, or you can like us on Facebook.
And if you want to subscribe, do a quick search on all the intertubes for the European Skeptics Podcast. You'll find us on SoundCloud, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify and all the rest.
The European Skeptics Podcast.
The real ESP experience.
I don't know how you can believe.
And now, a reading from the Book of Tim with Tim Mendham.
Hi, my name's Tim Mendham. I'm the Executive Officer of Australian Skeptics Inc. and I'm the editor of our magazine, The Skeptic. And today I'll be taking a reading from The Skeptic, March 2019, which is volume 39, number 1. And I'll be looking at a regular column called What Goes Around, which starts off with a fact or a set of facts and through association works its way round through a whole lot of different things until you end up where you started from, which shows that all knowledge is connected and connectable. And this one I'll be looking at wishing, gambling and calculating. We start off with that well-known phenomenon called confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is a tendency to interpret new evidence as confirmation of one's existing beliefs or theories. A variation of this is apophenia, the tendency to perceive connections and meaning between unrelated things. That term was coined by psychiatrist Klaus Conrad in his 1958 publication on the beginning stages of schizophrenia. He defined it as unmotivated seeing of connections, accompanied by a specific feeling of abnormal meaningfulness. He described the early stages of delusional thought as self-referential, over-interpretations of actual sensory perceptions as opposed to hallucinations. Apophenia has come to mean a universal human tendency to seek patterns in random information, such as gambling. The gambler's fallacy, also known as the Monte Carlo fallacy, or the fallacy of the maturity of chances, is the mistaken belief that if something happens more frequently than normal during a given period, it will happen less frequently in the future. It may also be stated as the belief that if something happens less frequently than normal during a given period, it will happen more frequently in the future. In situations where the outcome being observed is truly random and consists of independent trials of a random process, this belief is false. It is a fallacy that a sequence of trials carries a memory of past results, which tend to favour or disfavour future outcomes. The fallacy can arise in many situations, but is most strongly associated with gambling, where it is common among players. The term Monte Carlo fallacy originates from the best-known example of the phenomenon, which occurred in the Monte Carlo casino in 1913 during a game of roulette. Roulette is named after the French word meaning little wheel, and players may choose to place bets on either a single number, various groupings of numbers, red or black, odd or even, high or low. On August 18, the ball fell on black 26 times in a row. This was an extremely uncommon occurrence, with a probability of about 1 in 33 million. Gamblers lost millions of francs betting against black, reasoning incorrectly that the streak was causing an imbalance in the randomness of the wheel, that it had to be followed by a long streak of red. It didn't. Well, eventually it had red, but not after a long time. Roulette has been played in its present form as early as 1796 in Paris. An early description of the roulette game in its current form is found in a French novel, La Roulette, ou Histoire d'un jouet, it's a history of a player, by Jacques Leblay, which describes a roulette wheel in the Palais Royal in Paris in 1796. The first form of roulette was devised in 18th century France. The roulette mechanism is a hybrid of a gaming wheel invented in 1720 and the Italian game biribi. This wheel has places number 1 to 36, and in the European version 1-0, though in the American version there is a 0 and a 00, which gives the house better odds. Many historians believe Blaise Pascal introduced a primitive form of roulette in the 17th century in his search for a perpetual motion machine. Pascal, who lived from 1623 to 1662, was a French child prodigy, mathematician, physicist, inventor, writer, and Catholic theologian. His early work was in the natural and applied sciences, where he made important contributions to the study of fluids and the concepts of pressure and vacuum by generalizing the work of Evangelisti Torricelli. Pascal also wrote in defense of the scientific method. In 1642, while still a teenager, he started some pioneering work on calculating machines. After 3 years of effort and 50 prototypes, he built 20 finished machines, called Pascal's calculators, establishing him as one of the first inventors of the mechanical calculator. Pascal and his sister were influenced by doctors treating his father's broken hip, who were followers of Jansenism, a splinter group from the Catholic Church that espoused moral rigour and asceticism. Unlike his sister, he fell out with the movement and followed what some have called his worldly period, 1648 to 54. However, following an intense religious vision, he reconverted to Catholicism. It was during this period that he wrote two of his most famous epithets. The first goes, "The heart has its reasons, of which reason knows nothing." And the second is, "We almost invariably arrive at our beliefs not on the basis of proof, but on the basis of what we find attractive." That latter statement, in particular, is a classic description of confirmation bias. Which brings us back to where we started from. So that What Goes Around, from The Skeptic, March 2019, and you can read that issue and 39 years worth of other ones on our website skeptics.com.au. Free to download, have a read, pass around and subscribe.
Greetings, listeners. It's me, Captain Disillusion. On my YouTube channel called Captain Disillusion, Captain Disillusion, analyze viral videos of the strange and unbelievable. I explain how interframe video compression, 3D motion tracking, and stock VFX elements prove that Justin Bieber is not a secret reptilian alien, that those videos of ghost cars are just unintentional optical illusions, and that lightning did not strike a few feet away from a girl on a beach as we saw in the news. I'm real fun at parties. My best friend is a lens flare.
Eat a dimmer switch, Disillusion.
I do know other people. Sometimes they even show up in my videos. People like Skepticism's grandpa, James Randi, Cirque du Soleil acrobat Erica Lins, weight loss enthusiast Penn Jillette, and the actual Beekman from Beekman's World. I hope you'll check out my adventures, interact with me in a platonic way, and even consider becoming a patron of my work. You can do all that and more on YouTube or at CaptainDisillusion.com.
Now it's time once again to look through the archive, dive into the trove, that is Trove at trove.nla.gov.au, the online resource from the National Library of Australia. Gazettes, magazines, periodicals, newspapers, articles, items, reports, all digitised and searchable going back decades and decades. And in keeping with our series on Trove, where we look for the more classical forms of skepticism, UFOs, yowies, yetis, that sort of thing, this week I'm going to look for references to the term ESP. Now, that's an old-fashioned term, you really don't hear it much anymore. ESP, extrasensory perception. And I will read out two returns on the search, both from the year 1938, and both involving a certain Dr. Rhine. Now, the first result comes from the Shepparton Advertiser in the state of Victoria, and according to this it says from 1914 to 1953. On Friday the 22nd of April 1938, on page 19 we read, Sixth Sense, English, search for ESP, Airmail, our special service, London, March 19. English people appear to be lacking in the sixth sense claimed to have been found in America. Scientists have failed to discover the existence of extrasensory perception, known familiarly in the States as ESP. During the past 3 years, Dr. Rhine, a psychologist at Duke University, North Carolina, has been experimenting with a special set of 25 cards by means of which he declares he has proved the existence of a sixth sense. In the same period, Professor Thalis, Professor of Psychology at Glasgow University, and Mr. S. G. Soule, mathematician of London University, have experimented with the same type of cards without finding a vestige of ESP. Dr. Rhine's theories have been so widely accepted in America that his cards are used in a fireside game and are sold on all bookstores. Each 5 in a pack of 25 is marked with one of 5 symbols: star, cross, oblong, circle, or wave. The test is to call each card without seeing its face. And of course, these days those cards are known as Xena cards or Zena cards. According to Dr. Rhine, Mr. Soul said this week, people tested by him were able to call correctly up to 18 out of 25, or nearly 4 times the number allowed by the law of chance. But my co-workers and I performed 100,000 tests on more than 120 people in the psychological laboratory at the University College without finding one who could beat the laws of chance. The results of Professor Thales at Glasgow were equally negative. So not off to a flying start there for Dr. Rhine and his cards. And again, that was from April 1938. So let's skip forward a few months to October 1938, the 22nd of October, in the World's News from Sydney. And it looks like whatever that was, it lasted from 1901 to 1955. Page 3, a double-page article, Have You ESP Powers? Trying Out Telepathy. And there's a rather dramatic picture of a lady lying down and looking rather concerned. Telepathy and clairvoyance. Perhaps you possess one or the other, or both of these strange abilities that up until the last few years have been associated in the public mind with the black arts. Possess them and don't know a thing about it. 1 chance in 5, your mind is a living radio receiver, capable of apprehending messages sent out by other minds. Unspoken, unsingled, inaudible messages picked up when you tune in on thoughts projected through the ether. That's telepathy. Don't forget this comes from 1938. Same chance that you're a super X-ray machine, that you have some astonishing power outside the regular recognized senses that enables you to see hidden objects that really you can't see, or feel or smell or taste, perceive them even through brick walls or from a distance of miles and miles, see them without use of your eyes. That's clairvoyance. And the interesting part about the whole thing is that you can start right out testing yourself and your friends for hidden powers of telepathy and clairvoyance. In fact, it won't be at all surprising if ESP parties become quite the vogue during the approaching social season. Pure telepathy. What is ESP? It's the contraction for the inclusive term that scientists have given to these strange powers. Extrasensory perception. Perceiving by some power outside the regular recognized senses. Seeing, feeling, hearing, tasting, and smelling. Is there, then, such a thing as extrasensory perception as telepathy or clairvoyance? Let the reader judge. We'll consider an investigation of pure telepathy. Here it is, as made by Dr. J.B. Rhine at Duke University, North Carolina. In a room at the university sits Miss Sarah Ownby, one of Dr. Rhine's most valued assistants. On the table before her, face downward, there is a deck of cards. Not playing cards, but so-called ESP cards. The backs of the cards are not unlike those we use for games, but there are only 25 of them in the deck. The faces of the ESP cards are nothing like those of playing cards. There are 5 suits, that is, 5 sets of symbols. A square, a circle, a star, a Maltese cross, and a set of 3 wavy lines, each appearing on 5 cards. Notice that these symbols are entirely different in outline from the others. In another room, 250 miles away, sits another young woman, Miss May Frances Turner, also an enthusiastic scientific investigator. Can Miss Ownby lift off the top card of her deck, concentrate upon the symbol she finds on it, send her thought waves over mountain, valley, and stream, and register that image on the mind of Miss Turner 250 miles away? How many times can she succeed in doing that in 25 trials? No, there's no chance of the two young women having agreed upon any set order of the cards in advance. The deck is shuffled and cut just before the trial starts. They have set their watches, have agreed that the test will start at a certain minute, and that 5 minutes of concentration shall be used for each card. Oh, if I had a time machine, how I'd love to go back and examine their protocols for that test. We read on. 1 in 5 chance. Now, let's see how many symbols Miss Turner should name correctly if she relied upon pure guesswork. There are 5 each of the 5 symbols in the 25 cards. Supposing there were only 5 cards, each bearing a different symbol, involved in the test. It is obvious, then, that she would have 1 chance in 5 of naming correctly the symbol on any designated card, if she relied upon pure guesswork alone. 1 chance in 5 of scoring a hit. This mathematical chance is not changed by making up a deck of 25 cards, 5 bearing each symbol. The 1 to 5 chance still holds. Pure guesswork should make 5 hits in running through the full deck. If Miss Turner makes more than 5 hits out of 25, there is a likelihood that something beyond mere chance enters into her success. When the minute hand of her watch passes the agreed-upon time, Miss Ownby picks off a card, holds it before her, concentrates upon it for 5 minutes. Miss Turner, in tense concentration, finds a symbol shaping itself in her mind. Whatever it is, she jots it down. At the end of 5 minutes, the lady at Duke picks up the second card and goes through the same process. So on she goes through the entire deck of 25 cards, 5 minutes for each card. The test takes 2 hours and 5 minutes. Immediately upon finishing her scoring, Miss Turner seals the sheet in an envelope, addresses it to the Duke University, and mails it. The envelope comes into Dr. Ryan's hands with the seals untampered with. Neither of these young women has any stake in proving or disproving the possibility of telepathy. They are serious-minded scientists seeking avidly for the truth. In 3 days' trials, Miss Turner scored 19, 16, and 16, an average of 17 hits per run, more than 3 times what could be expected of chance. The long-distance trials were carried on for 5 more days after the initial 3, under the same conditions, except that the period of concentration upon each card was cut down. Then Miss Turner did less well, but she kept her average up to 10 hits per 25 cards. That is only one of hundreds upon hundreds of tests, some of them for thousands of runs, through the ESP deck. With a great many subjects, the test led to no conclusions. The hits were just about the chance average. But with other subjects, the average is 1 in 5. Results were significant, often amazing. The probabilities are that most of us admit the possibility of telepathy, the transmission of ideas from one mind to another without using any of the recognized senses. But clairvoyance, actually to perceive something without seeing it or having its image transmitted by telepathy, is something else again. Here is one of Dr. Ryan's tests. He is in his laboratory. In comes a student named Pierce, who has been much interested in the experiments. He is hurrying to keep an engagement, doesn't even take off his coats.
"Oh, come on,"
urges Dr. Ryan.
"Let's run a couple of tests."
Pierce looks at his watch and agrees, if they don't take too long. The professor takes up a deck of ESP cards and shuffles and cuts them, lays them face down on the table, asks Pierce to name the top card. There can be no telepathy in this. Dr. Ryan doesn't know what the top card is, and neither does the subject. The latter guesses, and guesses wrong, is wrong of 5 subsequent guesses. Probably he was guessing.
Come, Pierce. If you can't do better than that,
banters the investigator, as he shuffles and cuts again.
I'll bet you $20 you can't name the top card.
But Pierce, taking hold of himself, does name it correctly. On they go. Dr. Ryan shuffling and cutting and repeating his $20 bet. Hit after hit, Pierce scored. Their tension didn't relax until he had named the top card, which neither he nor the professor could possibly know by any ordinary means of perception, correctly 25 times in succession.
Pierce calling 25 cards in a row correctly was the most phenomenal thing that I have ever observed,
writes Dr. Ryan.
The odds against his feat, having been due to pure unadulterated chance, are 298 quadrillion, 23 trillion, 223,876,953,125. Well, you'll never get me to do that again,
Pierce broke out when it was over.
Why?
Dr. Ryan asks.
You seem to do it easily enough. Well, I don't know why exactly, but you'll never get me to do it again,
the subject held. Evidently, such an amazing display of clairvoyance takes something out of the subject. Did Pierce collect his $500? No. The bets were all in fun. It should be explained that the method used in this sensational test was somewhat different from that of the usual clairvoyance trial. Systems of all sorts, too numerous to detail in this short article, are used in Dr. Ryan's explorations of the new mental frontier. One of them is to lay the shuffled and cut deck face down on a table and have the subject call the cards straight down through, no cards being removed during the test, the checkup being deferred until the end. Even in this test, some remarkable scores have been run, as many as 15 to 16 hits in 25, 3 times what chance would allow, and this in thousands of runs. The tests check and recheck each other, both in telepathy and clairvoyance. They are run with all sorts of safeguards. And that's the end of that report. And again, that comes to us from a newspaper called The World's News, dated the 22nd of October 1938. And just briefly, one of the many other returns for the search ESP lands us on the pages of the Australian Woman's Weekly from the 23rd of July 1980. An article that's headlined, "What's Happening in ESP Today?" with the subheadline, "Psychic research was long ago taken from the world of fiction and is the subject of serious scientific investigation. Dr. Charles Osborne, a senior physics lecturer at Caulfield Institute of Technology, has been delving into the phenomenon of ESP since 1977. And the first part says, the world of the psychic researcher is very different from that depicted in the media. It is not a world of things that go bump in the night or people with superhuman powers. Rather, most of the research is as routine as in other areas of science. So what is happening in ESP? Now let me see if I can cut to the chase. This article mentions things like out-of-body experience, telepathy, work on ESP in children has produced some extremely interesting results, it says. It even talks about metal bending, reincarnation, and the final paragraph says, what of the future? In Australia, there is a need for centralised testing laboratories and more testing of children. People who have had psychic experiences should contact the Caulfield Institute of Technology, 900 Dandenong Road, PO Box 197, Caulfield East 3145. So there we go, another trip through the decades of the digitised newspapers, magazines and so on at trove.nla.gov.au, and a bit of a nostalgia trip, I must say, looking at references to ESP. Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone. Now, next week's show should be interesting. It will be produced, at least released during Skepticon 2020. I'll have to look at the schedule and see what I can tie in for that one. And I think by this time next week we'll know the winner of the Bent Spoon Award. And if you're curious to know who's in the running for the Bent Spoon, the award nobody wants to win, just go to skeptics.com.au and look at the list of, I would say, hopeful nominees, hopeless nominees, nominees who don't want to be nominees, something like that. And of course, before I go, thank you to all those lovely, wonderful, helpful people who subscribe to the Skeptic Zone at Patreon or PayPal at skepticzone.tv. There's a big link there, you can't miss it. And during this ridiculous year, the support of Skeptic Zone listeners has meant more to the show than ever before. But for this week, this is Richard Saunders signing off from Sydney, Australia.
You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Please visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for show notes, contacts, and to access the back catalogue of episodes going back to 2008. You can follow the Skeptic Zone podcast on Twitter at Skeptic Zone, visit our Facebook page, or leave a review on iTunes. You can also support the Skeptic Zone via Patreon or PayPal. The Skeptic Zone podcast is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed on the Skeptic Zone are not necessarily those of Australian skeptics or any other skeptical organisation.
Hello to the people who listen after the music. The afterthoughts for the dice game. Wow. That's my giant tub of dice. Why do I always get those things confused? All right, I'm going to do a very interesting one this week. Normally we roll a D10, 10-sided, or a D6, the classic, 3 times, and you use your psychic powers to predict. See, I'll use that one, I'll use this one, and I'll use this one, and I'll use this one. Okay, I've got 4 variations this week to try out. Going to roll each one once. Starting with a D4, a 4-sided die. 4-sided die. So here we go. Sorry, Susan Gerbeck, this die does not go up to 5 or 6. So here we go. It's the shape of a pyramid. It's quite interesting. I think I must have picked this up in at DragonCon. Okay, here we go. A D4. First number is 2. All right, write that down. 2. The next one is the classic, of course, a D6, 6-sided, the most widely used die in the world, I suppose. And 6. 6. Second number is 6, put that aside. The next one is a D10. Oh, lovely sort of translucent blue. It's another thing I miss about not being at conventions and so forth, because I give away these Skeptic Zone D10s. Okay, here we go. 10. Oh, plain. You have no idea how often I've started recording only to have planes come over. There's one now. Anyway, and the last one is a D20. A D20. Sort of a pale blue, I think. D20. Here we go. And the number is... what's that? 3. So, this week's winning numbers are 2, 6, 10, and 3. How did you go, Maud?